Hi, I'm Dan Pinchbeck. I'm the creative director of the Chinese Room.
I'm Jessica Curry and I'm the studio head and composer.
So one of the ways in which you can discover story in Everybody's Come to Rapture is through recorded devices, so radios, TVs, phones, anything capable of carrying an electrical signal basically has a scene behind it. So part of the game is going through and finding all the different places where you might sort of discover that kind of content. And it's really important to us that it isn't just, we're not just spoon feeding the player, we're not just dropping story in their path as they go. But I think one of the ways in which you as a player can really feel like this is my story that I've discovered, this is a personal journey, is by it being kind of like your responsibility to find this stuff, your responsibility to kind of uncover the mystery yourself. The kind of story that you find on these devices is very particular to the writing as well. So it's a really interesting case where the way in which you navigate and the things that draw you and the things that kind of like the choices you make in terms of how you explore and what you discover will affect your understanding of the narrative. So you'll get a different take on the events if you choose to find, say, all the radio broadcasts and if you ignore them. And I think that's a really interesting, important thing which games can do.
And the setting was, I think, really important for us. We wanted to tell what's normally a really epic story in a very intimate, very specific English environment. It's set in 1984, and as we go round you'll see that we really are strongly evoking that period. I think it enables you to actually feel the intimacy of the story more, because normally you're in these really amazing epic settings, but this is really intimate, it's really quiet, it's a traditional village that a lot of people can relate to.
What's happening just now is this is another one of the major ways in which the story unfolds, and we call these tilt scenes. These are kind of like critical, important kind of like pieces of the story, and why they're singled out and what it means, the way in which they're presented is, again, it's wrapped up in the kind of like the mystery of the story. So that's something that we want the players to really kind of explore and interpret themselves. But we're really kind of pleased with these in a way, because this is to actually engage with this content, you're using the tilt on the 6-axis to actually unlock them, kind of like the metaphor we always used is tuning in a radio. It's a really nice, different kind of feel of control. It feels like something that's much more physical, much more engaging than sort of just press a button to kind of like turn the story on or off.
And we talked a lot about how we wanted to represent the characters in the game, and something that I was really interested in was that when you read a book or you listen to a radio play, you imagine those characters yourself. And I think what the Chinese Room is hopefully really good at with story as well is allowing the player that space to imagine and to create their own stories. And so the characters that you just saw, you have these very beautiful suggestions, the echoes of a person, and then that allows you the space and freedom to put your own emotional and kind of physical interpretation of what that person looks like.
One of the things that we've always really focused on in our games is kind of like, I think that really draws us to games is the sort of the sense of just being in the world, just being saturated in the place and feeling the atmosphere of it. And that's something that was really important to us with Rapture, of like, there's kind of like, there is this story to engage with, there's a mystery to be solved, there's a very kind of like emotional connection to be made, but there's also just that amazing feeling that you get of just being there that I absolutely love from games. And games do, you know, it's what they do better than any other medium, is just that sense of just, I'm here and it feels amazing to be here and I'm really engaged. This is a really incredibly affecting space. And we talked a lot about that in terms of making sure the player had kind of like space to breathe emotionally and room to just kind of like feel what was going on and reflect. So balancing out the kind of like the amount of content which is in there and making sure that actually we're not just constantly stimulating the player, that there's plenty of opportunity to just kind of stand and feel it. Was a really important part of the design, and that's got a really big challenge. I mean, we're a team of 15 people, there's not a lot of us, and it's really quite big, and part of the reason why it had to be so big, and we built the world and then we actually ended up making the world about 50% bigger once the content had gone in, because we realised the content was just going kind of bang, 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 one scene after the next, and there was never an opportunity to just go, I'm just going to walk along a road, I'm just going to cross a field, I'm just going to stand behind this tree and just soak up what's been going on around me. So we kind of made our lives quite a lot more difficult really in the end, didn't we, by having to grow it?
Yeah, but I think we learnt that lesson from Esther, really, that people responded to having that space to dream and to think and to imagine. And everyone said, oh, people are going to find it really boring and that this, you know, nothing happens. But actually, I think it's about trusting the player, and I think Rapture's continued that lesson, really, of saying the player can take ambiguity, the player can take a slow space, the player can take an open world complex story, and that to me is really important. I think so many games underestimate players, and it's really frustrating as a result because they're actually quite patronised in terms of just that kind of constant stimulus. And what I really like about Rapture particularly is it just lets the experience breathe, and that will require patience. I think there's no doubt it requires a certain type of mindset, but I do think players can absolutely take that. I'm really looking forward to seeing if they can.
I think they can, and I think one of the things which I really like about it is as well is that we've actually kind of told, I think, a very complicated, very deep kind of narrative, but it's all in game, it's all in action, it's all in real time. You're not putting the controller down at any point, you're not waiting for scenes or story to play out. It's happening around you and you're active during that process, which means that it's your story, you've got the agency in it. And that to me is more interesting as a writer than a branching narrative where you can say, well, okay, it's a branching interactive narrative, but actually each one of those narrative units is going to be delivered with a cutscene. Is much less interesting than saying, actually, the amazing thing about games is the choices you make, where you stand, how long you listen, what you look at, where you choose to discover. These are the things that give you agency in a story, and that's something that games can do that no other medium can't. And that's much more interesting than saying, if you go left, turn to page 23 and watch cutscene 4A, and if you turn right, go to page 24 and watch cutscene 4B, which is not as interesting in terms of storytelling. So these things that you're seeing now are, we call them motes, and they are, we can't really tell you what they are because that would kind of give the game away, and that's part of the mystery, but these are AI controlled characters, and within the game they kind of act as, they've got different functions really. And what was really, really important to us is that we focused not so much on what they functionally do or what the kind of like the purpose of them are. I mean, it's something which is a very recognisable kind of game thing to have a kind of like a robot guide or a disembodied guide, whether that's kind of Cortana or the ghosts in Destiny, or it's a very, very kind of got that thing of it. It's kind of like it helps kind of like helps you understand the world and this kind of stuff. The key thing for us when we were developing though was to really focus on the sense of life of them. And an early conversation we had when we first started designing the AI was saying the only function we want them to really have is to feel as if they are part of the world and to make the player engage with them as if they're part of the world rather than the game mechanic, which is actually really hard. We found it much easier to make something which is mechanically functional than it is to make something which has a sense of agency and is kind of effective in that way. And I think that kind of goes for all of the effects. The challenge for them has been how to keep them abstract and leave the player a lot of room for interpretation and a lot of room for the player's imagination to operate within them, but whilst kind of providing enough pegs to hang that on. So it's almost like we're constantly building kind of like architectures or skeletons that gave enough for players to be able to go, I can really engage with this, I can really project into it, but not so much that they started really dictating terms to the player, which is a really quite a hard balance, I think, to find. Yeah. Obviously, one of the things that's really, really important is the kind of historical timeline of the game as well. That as well as trying to capture a really definite sense of place, we wanted to really capture a definite sense of time, and we set it very specifically. It's the 6th of June 1984. It's not the 80s. It's an absolute kind of like period, and that's been interesting for particularly for the art and audio teams to sort of say, we don't want this to be an exercise in nostalgia, but we do want to really try and find the very specific feel of that era. And it's so important to the narrative in terms of, you know, it's an apocalyptic narrative, and the 80s were sort of with the Cold War and kind of like the emergence of AIDS and Thatcherism, mining, yeah. It was a very uncomfortable, kind of like quite a paranoid kind of era growing up in it. And it was really kind of difficult to kind of say, we don't want to kind of smash the players around the head with this, but we really want to make sure this isn't just anywhere, anytime, but we think it helps kind of make you care about the story and the characters, that you can really situate them in that sort of time and place.
I think as well it's very connected to the age that we are in our early 40s. This was our childhood, and I think it's so imbued with that sense in a way of the fear that you feel as a child, and that kind of fear about the apocalypse that was completely so relevant to us at that age. Watching threads at school, being given literature at school about the apocalypse. It
When
was
the Wind Blows.
Yeah, When the Wind Blows, Raymond Briggs. It was very, very live as an issue for us. So I suppose it's quite a personal exploration as well, really.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that shows in the game, and I think that, you know, kind of radiates from us down to the team, even the team that weren't even born when the game is set, which is really frightening. And we know that a lot of the players of this game won't have been born when the game is set, which is a really interesting place to be developing a game from, kind of going, because it's not history like Assassin's Creed, it's recent, it's within our lifetimes, but not within the lifetimes of a lot of people that will play it, and how do you kind of really accurately kind of get to that? But it's been great watching the whole team, including, like I say, sort of younger members of the team who weren't born when it was set, really engage heavily with the kind of like, not just really meticulous research in terms of object design and stuff like that, but really trying to capture the sort of the feel of what did it mean to be an English rural village in the 1980s.
So I think what we're really trying to do is make a beautiful game that people love being in and feel completely immersed in. It's difficult to know how people are going to respond to this game, but it's been made with a lot of love and a lot of passion, and I just think it does something really, really different, actually.
Yeah, I think it is that thing of kind of going, it's a game that we really, really believe in. It's a game that you know, it's great that Sony really, really believe in as well. And it's just, I think kind of it's nice to be in that sort of situation of going, sort of love it or hate it. It's not like anything else out there. And we really hope people love it. But it's nice to be sort of like part of that process of saying, games are really expanding, they're incredibly diverse now. And you know, what we're really trying to present, I guess, is a title which is part of that diversity and is part of that idea of going, we can do anything with this medium, so let's try this.
And it couldn't be made in any other medium apart from games.
Yeah, no, it's
really
a game. This is not a film story, it's not a novel, it's not a play. This story could only exist in a game, and I think that's really important.